Hey guys, Tyler Berger here with BassFishingHQ. Today I want to talk about the 4 best bait casting rods that you need. Stay tuned, it's going to be a good one. Before we get too far into the video, guys, this video is brought to you by the Bass hat, and that's what I'm wearing right now. If you click on the link in the description, you're going to land on the BassFishingHQ website where you can actually purchase one of these hats. It really helps support this channel, and I would really appreciate it. So when it comes to fishing rods, your rods are an extremely important factor into you getting more fish in the boat. Having the right action and having the right bend to a rod is really going to allow you to not only hook up with more fish, but it's going to allow you to catch more fish, whether you're fishing from the bank or whether you're fishing from the boat. Now, if you look at a lot of professional anglers out there on tour, a lot of these guys have 20, 30, 40, 50 rods, and a lot of them will have 10 to 15 rods on the front deck of your boat. And even myself, I have 15 or 20 rods that I have, but really, I have 4 main bait casting rods that basically I can do every single type of technique with. Just 4 is all I really need. And of course, there are some finesse techniques that I use a spinning rod for, and we'll save that for a later video. So make sure to subscribe if you want to see that video. But today is about just 4 bait cast rods that you need. You don't need to spend a whole lot of money buying 10, 15, 20 rods. I really think just 4 is all you need in order to do a ton of different techniques. So let's go through my top 4. I'm gonna save my very favorite rod for last. Let's get to it. So bait casting rod number 1 that I'm gonna recommend that you get, and this is one of the most versatile rods that you can buy. This is a 7-foot medium heavy action rod. Okay, now this particular brand is an Akuma rod, and I'm going to leave all the links in the description if you guys want to check out the exact rods that I have. But the biggest and most important part is really the length and the action of the rod that I'm talking about. So again, this is a 7-foot medium heavy action rod. Now this is an extremely versatile rod. If you were buying your first bait casting rod ever, this is the rod that I would recommend. Even if you've been fishing a long time, this is a rod that you probably have on your front deck of your boat or with you at all times, and if you don't, you definitely should. Again, a 7-foot medium heavy action rod. Now this particular rod, I really like to use this rod for spinner baits. I also like to use this rod for chatterbaits. I will also use braid on this rod and use it for buzz baits. Not having it be too long, but still having a little length really allows you to place a bait where you need it to be. So this is also my favorite skipping rod. So if I'm skipping a jig under docks or something like that, this is the rod I go with. I'm gonna put 20-pound fluorocarbon on it when I do that. The point of this video is that really you only need 4 rods, and you can match up different reels with that rod to do your different techniques. For instance, when I'm fishing a spinner bait with this rod, I actually like a little bit slower gear ratio. I like a 6.3 to 1 or 6.8 to 1. Something in that gear ratio is what I really like. Now, if I'm skipping a dock with a jig, I like a 8.1 to 1, which is the reel that I have on here right now. So guys, this is the first rod. This is a great rod, all-purpose. This is literally called the all-purpose rod. Again, I'll leave a link in the description, but again, 7-foot medium heavy. All right, so let's talk about rod number 2. This is a 7-foot 6-inch heavy action rod. But I love this rod for a multitude of different techniques. For instance, I use this rod a lot if I'm just flipping a jig or flipping a Texas rig. You know, I'll use 20-pound fluorocarbon line, and this is what I use to flip, you know, Texas rigs and jigs into heavier cover. Now, if I put 50-pound or 65-pound braid on this line, this will become a punching rod. It's really important to know that just because you get a heavy action in one brand, it's not going to be the exact same as a heavy action in another brand. Okay, now this rod that I have here has more of a 60-40 bend. It's almost a little bit more of a parabolic bend to it, and I really like rods that are like that. I've kind of gotten away from those 80-20 rods for the most part. There are some situations where I really do like them, but this rod to me just has a really versatile and perfect bend to it itself. And what I mean by that is when you're flipping, which is what I like to use this rod a lot for, I really like to let that rod load when I set the hook. And having a broomstick is not good actually when you're flipping. You don't want to rip big holes in that fish because it's going to cause you to lose a lot of fish. And also as I'm fighting fish, like a big fish to the boat, that parabolic, that 60-40 bend that I kind of have in this rod is going to help keep that fish pinned, which is what you want whether you're fishing from the bank or fishing in a tournament or anything like that. So this is an extremely versatile rod. All these rods can fish a lot of different techniques. Now again, I like to flip and pitch jigs and Texas rigs with this. This is also my Carolina rig rod, okay? This is also the rod that I use bigger like swim baits, like a bigger glide bait, for instance, or a bigger like soft swim bait, like an 8-inch mag draft style swim bait. I'm gonna use this rod with 20-pound fluorocarbon to do that. If I'm fishing heavy mats with a frog, this is the rod I go to. I'll put 65, 50-pound braid on it, and this is the rod. This is an extremely versatile rod. It's also my Alabama rig rod. So I really like this rod. Again, that 7.6 heavy action. Again, this is a heavy action, but it acts a little bit more medium heavy. This particular rod has just a really good bend to it. So that's the second rod. All right, so let's talk about rod number 3. Now, all these rods are probably gonna look fairly similar to you as I'm holding them up, but they actually are all different rods. These are actually the TCS rods, the Tournament Concept series from Akuma. These rods just really have a great action to them. This rod is a 7-foot medium action rod. This rod has a little bit more of that parabolic bend to it. This is the rod that I choose when it comes to a lot of different moving baits. So jerk baits, love this rod. Crank baits, love this rod. This is my top water baby, right? I love throwing top waters. I love throwing pop R's. I love throwing spooks. And this is the rod that I go with. Now, when I fish top water, I usually use 30-pound braid to a mono leader of some sort. That's my system, and this is the perfect rod. Now, with a top water, you're typically moving a lot, and I like the little bit shorter. Like this is a 7-foot. I like having a little bit shorter rod because you're just moving your rod a lot, working that top water bait, whether you're walking the dog or you're throwing a pop R. You're working the bait a lot. I literally love this rod for topwater applications. Another thing that I really like to do is put, small Kitex on this rod. I don't always like to throw Kitex on spinning rods. I like to throw them on Baitcast rods. If you put anywhere from 8 to 12-pound fluorocarbon on this line, you can throw a really small, I'm talking like a 2.8 inch to a 3.8 inch really, really well with this rod. It loads up really nice. I don't like a big hook in those smaller Kitex because a smaller hook allows you to have more action. And so you don't need a lot of oomph, but this has enough to get a good hook in, but also you land a lot more with this particular rod. So rod number 3, one of my absolute favorites. Again, crankbaits, top waters, jerk baits, Kitex. This thing will do a lot, and that is a 7-foot medium action rod. Rod number 4, and this is my baby, right? This is my absolute, I love this thing. This is my rod. Like if I could have one rod and reel for the rest of my life, this is it. Sometimes I just wish that maybe I could sleep with it at times. Okay, enough of that. This is my favorite rod and reel setup right here, my favorite bait casting rod. This is probably the most versatile rod that you have in your boat or in your arsenal of rods. This rod is a 7-foot, 3-inch heavy action rod, okay? Now again, this is a heavy action rod, but this particular brand, this Akuma TCS, it really has a softer tip to it. It has more of that 60-40 bend to it. And I'm telling you what, this is kind of more like a medium heavy to heavy action in between there. And this is perfect. Like this is an absolute perfect rod for so many different techniques. Now, the number one thing that I use this rod for is frog fishing. Like I love throwing frogs. As I said earlier, I love throwing top waters. I love throwing my popping frogs and my regular frogs with this rod. What I love about it is that I don't like a stiff rod when I'm throwing a frog. With this rod, I can really place it under overhanging trees, under docks, wherever I need this to go. It's really easy to cast because of the bend of this rod. Now I do love throwing this rod with a frog, but the reason why I have several of these is because I use it as what I call my offshore rod. Okay, now this is the rod that I use for a lot of different techniques when I'm fishing offshore. So for instance, if I'm dragging a big worm, I'll put 15 to 17 pound fluorocarbon on this, and I'll drag a big worm through grass, through brush piles, across rocks. That's what I love. I also use this for a football jig. It's perfect for a football jig. Again, about 15 to 17 pound test, and I can drag it anywhere I need to, hop it, fish it down a bluff wall, whatever it may be. I can use this for a hair jig. If I'm snapping a hair jig off the bottom, this is the rod I use. Again, 15 pound line. If I'm using a spoon, a lot of spoons, sometimes I'll use a bigger 7/6 rod like that 7/6 heavy that I was talking about earlier. But for some spoons, I really like this rod for it. It's a very versatile rod. You can also put 20 pound line on it, and it's a perfect pitching stick. You know, if I'm pitching to logs or lay downs, you know, and if you like a little bit shorter rod, sometimes I fish that 7/6 a lot when I'm pitching and flipping, but this is a perfect rod to do that with as well. Another thing that I love this rod for, if you know me, I like to fish like 6-inch soft swim baits, kind of like that mag draft style swim bait a lot. And this is the rod for that situation. It's perfect. It's just a perfect rod, right? The thing about this particular rod that I'm holding here is it just has a very good bend. It's again kind of has a 60-40 style bend. Although it's a heavy action rod is what it's labeled for, it acts a little bit more of that medium heavy to heavy action. So it's really important to have that, because this rod, you want a rod that has backbone to drive hooks, but you don't want it too stiff all the way through, because that's gonna make you lose a lot of fish. So it's really important to have a softer tip, a good backbone, and this is really the perfect rod. It loads up super well. This is my baby. Guys, I hope you understand how important it is to have the right action for the lures that you are fishing. And the great thing is with these 4 rods that I just told you about, you can apply any different technique to them, and you're gonna have a great rod and reel arsenal. If you have any questions about the rods, about anything else, leave a comment below. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and please subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.